Okay, you should be able to see my screen, I hope. We're good. All right, so we are going to get started. This is our first formal one beyond just sort of the introduction that all of you have seen, and I hope you had a chance to see it. And I also hope that you had a chance to bring along your numbered outcomes, because we are going to do a little bit of work on that. If you didn't, it's not going to be life or death, but just if you can get in the habit of having it with you, that would be great, even if it's on the screen. But probably hard copy is what most of you have been using, or in the other sessions have been using. So we're just kind of keep that sort of handy. So I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement and a little bit of a little discussion at the end of that as well. In the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples, the story of creation of this country, in a way that history may have forgotten. And keeping in mind, we are coming to you from Treaty 6, but we know that we are from all parts of the province, so we are definitely crossing 6, 7, and 8 treaty territories, and acknowledge all of the people from each of those lands. I want to talk a little bit, and I'm going to go into the habit of this each time we do our land acknowledgement to maybe tie it in a little bit to what the organizing idea is that we're going to be talking about. And in this case, how does our land acknowledgement really relate to living systems? And it's important for us to understand, everybody comes at their understanding of First Nations culture and how we're going to infuse that into our teachings. You come at it from different perspectives and at different levels of comfort. So just for those who might be at the beginning points, in Indigenous culture, Mother Earth is part of the family. It isn't seen as inanimate as we would see in our definition of what is living and non-living. And so when we have that conversation, do we still say that the soil is not living? We can. But we also want to preface it that there is understandings in different cultures and that it's seen through different eyes or different lenses. And so we have to share that piece at some point as well. So we don't want to just make it a hard and fast that soil isn't living, or a rock isn't living. A rock has spirit. Grandfather Rock is seen as the mountains that exist on Earth today. And those mountains have been around for hundreds and thousands of years, and they hold the wisdom of the land over those years. And so that is how part of the story and the history of the culture and the country start to come together. So keep that in your mind as you are teaching and preparing your units. If you ever need any material for that, just send me an email. I'll be glad to share what I have. I'll always try to put some in, and I have put some in here for your lessons as well. But just to give you an FYI, because not everybody is aware of some of the backgrounds. Okay, we're also hoping that, as we said before, when you're coming through this session, Ted and I have been really pretty busy the last couple of days and weekends to try to get things ready, because we weren't expecting to do this so quickly. But we want to make sure that you understand that this is a starting point for you. We know that you're piloting. We know we don't have the usual resources that we kind of tend to get handed to us as we start new curriculum. And so there is an opportunity now for us to really kind of learn through the process together. So we're hoping that if each one of these sessions that you gain a little bit of confidence and a little bit of feeling that, you know, I can start this. I may not have all the things I want, but I can definitely make a good start of it. And I have lots of things in my toolbox already that I can use. And that's the other piece, is that you're maybe piloting, but there's a lot of materials that you have available to you that you'll already have used before. So it's not all going to be brand new to you. We want to give you a little bit of a sense of direction. So we're going to unpack some of the terminology for you in the new curriculum. And Ted's going to do a great job of leading you through that. And then that sense of efficacy that I know, I feel I've got some resources and some skill sets in this. Not everybody's a math teacher, not everybody's a science teacher, not everybody's an LA teacher. But you know what? In grade 1, we tend to be everything. And so we try to do the best we can and meet those areas that maybe weren't our strength before. So again, if science wasn't it, hopefully this gives you a little bit of a boost in getting you started. So we did send out some norms in session 1, and thank you for those of you who already put in the chat box privately to me that, you know, we recognize that you really wanted to have your camera on, but you're at home and you don't have a camera. I understand that totally. But yes, if we can have a face and a dialogue, it doesn't mean you have to chime in. It doesn't mean you have to always share something. But it's just nice to have somebody that's on the other end that's live. And I'm sure you felt the same when you were doing your work with the students. We also want to make sure that you can share your expertise. If you have things that are working for you in a particular area already, and you're willing to share it, we will start a folder for you which has shared resources in it, both resources as text resources or links, and one that would have lessons in it. So anything that you're willing to share, please send them my way, and I will gladly post them in there. And hopefully that's going to grow over time. So again, we are doing living systems. There's no kindergarten presentation because that is not part of their curriculum. So grade 1 is the first group that is starting on living systems. I'm going to let Ted take over from here, and then we can get rolling on some of our terminology.
Okay, I'm a little bit rusty with turning on my microphone. Apologies. Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for taking time in your day. I know it's always a long day teaching, and to take your time after school, we want to make sure that it's valuable for you. We recognize that. So we're looking at the organization of living systems, and just as a quick review, that holds some of the main key concepts that are going to be underlying this science course and others. And then, of course, to narrow those down, we get to the guiding questions and the learning outcomes. And eventually the cusps. And again, the cusps, we bring them all together and work with those. That's how we determine whether students meet that learning outcome. And that is what we need to report to parents. So in this particular case, the learning outcome, there's only one associated with this organizing idea, that students investigate and examine the needs and plants of animals. And that's the guiding question above there really helps us to understand really what the crux is. We ask ourselves, how do plants and animals survive? And we create that answer for students. We don't ask them that question necessarily, but it helps us to move forward in planning how our lesson is going to come on. And it's sometimes nice to look back at those big pictures because we can sometimes get lost in some of the smaller things and get stuck. And if we look at the big picture again, it's going to help provide some guidance as to where we need to go. Just a reminder with on the next slide, we've got some wording. In grade 1, there's not too many of these, but you'll find the including probably one of the most common words that show up. Once again, those are things that need to be included and students need to know as we go through the curriculum. At the bottom, there are examples such as, and those are the ones that you can cover if you want, or if you have some of your own examples, you can use those. And there aren't many of these parenthesized words in the grade 1 curriculum. I could only find one, and that's when it comes to the idea of connection, that plants and animals help meet the needs of humans through the idea of connection or meeting our social emotional needs. So a word like that means we can use connection, making sure we feel connected or belonging or feel good, and anything to do with that social emotional part. We want to bring those words in eventually in our discussions, so our social emotional needs, but at this point, they're interchangeable with the students.
And this wording we addressed in the very first video, and we did post one of the handouts that has that clarification of what do I do about including such as words that are in brackets, those types of things. So we're bringing it up now for session 2, and we will for all the grades for session 2, but we won't bring it up again. So if you haven't downloaded it, it would be a good thing to keep beside you wherever you've got your numbered outcomes document. Just throw it in there so that you just remember that that including is a critical piece, because those are the pieces that aren't really negotiable.
And just one other point about the progressions. In our previous video, we showed how to find them. You can find them on the Learn Alberta site, and they're meant to be embedded in what we do. And I suppose when we think about, if we were to ask, I guess, teachers or a group of teachers and say, at the end of the day, what's important for our kids? to be ready for the next grade or to be ready when they leave our school system, when they leave our care. And probably what will show up a lot in the discussion are a lot of those words that appear in the competencies. We want our kids to be critical thinkers, to be creative thinkers. The issues facing our kids require problem solving and collaboration. We need citizens who are involved and can actively participate and make good for the larger community. And so embedded in our lessons should be some of those things that address the competencies and the literacy skills, help students understand how to navigate different texts through their different courses, in this case, science, and the numeracy progressions. And those literacy numeracy progressions do help kids to transfer some of those skills that they're learning in those subjects to a new context. And we'll talk about that later, which really helps in the transfer of those things. So we're not going to dig into these, but do keep in mind that they're really in the background. And depending on how you unpack the curriculum, you can either hit those things or not. And what we're going to show you along the way is how, when you choose an approach or plan for this course or any course, that what you decide to do with your kids can help promote those things and help promote the things that we know are really important for kids to master as they go through their school.
And I think too, it's important to remember that there's not a one size fits all here. You all have your own unique teaching style. So you will see even the same outcome in a different way. So what you address in each of those columns may be very different, and yet you're still all meeting the same outcome. So again, it's just your style of teaching and how you're envisioning to unpack something.
In the previous video in session 1, again, we asked you to look through the curriculum through different lenses. And one of the lenses we wanted you to look at was the lens of a concept. In other words, when you look at the curriculum, is it possible to see the different concepts? Because at the end of the day, it's those concepts, which again are organizing ideas, that lay the foundation for the understandings. You'll find them, if you look for them, they will be nouns, and there will be always some attributes that are associated with those ideas that make them so. And there are always examples that one can find that fit those categories. So I'm just going to take a look at the list of words here with the knowledge, understandings, and skills and procedures, and say we would know that plants, for example, is a concept. It has certain characteristics. It is, there are many examples of it. And so we would consider that one of the concepts, one of the key concepts. But I want you to take just a minute or so and take a look and see if you can identify other concepts, either in the learning outcome or any of the cusps, the knowledge, understanding, or skills and procedures, and see what pops up for you.
So this is just on the very first page of your Living Systems in grade 1. If you're using your numbered outcomes document, just that first one. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but let's see if we all can kind of agree on what those big concepts are that are sort of staring at you. And if you don't have your numbered outcomes, just look on the screen and just jot them down. But no one's going to ask you for them. They're just for yourself.
This isn't a test.
No, not a test.
It's just helping you to have that conceptual lens, because it's amazing how even when you're getting resources for kids and you're going to bring something new in, there may be some concepts there that you'll want to make sure that they have a good handle on before you use that resource with them. So getting into the habit of looking at what you're using through the lens of concepts is handy. I think we could maybe just go to the next slide and see if there are any that you found. I did mention plants was a concept, and animals therefore would be. We've got needs as well. Living things is a concept, and you'll see that they not only are part of the main learner outcome, but they are part of the different cusps. So we're always returning to those concepts. So at the end of the day, having students really know what they mean, what makes a plant, a living thing, an animal, are really important for them to really understand the whole thing, that plants and animals are living things. And it really makes it, for them to have that solid understanding of those concepts, makes it possible to go through the skills and procedures. There are some other, did there are some other things. I'm going to show you a couple more that are sometimes we forget. And there are concepts associated to some of the skills and procedures that we have here. So the concepts that identified are really connected to the knowledge part. But if you take a look, when we take a look at the next slide, Chris, we'll identify some that are skill-related concepts. So similarities and differences are concepts as well. They're ideas. We can categorize things that people say when they describe something as a similarity or a difference. And we can also tell students that, look at, make an observation about this. But there's a difference between an observation and an inference. And that's something we know that kids often have difficulty with. They may look at something and say, well, that child is happy. That's more of an inference than an observation. What we would say is that child is smiling or they're laughing. We can see and hear things, and we can observe certain things. So it's good to make those differentiations as well. They're embedded in the skill, but there's a concept related to that as well. Sharing is another example there.
And I was going to say, let's remember too that we said, let's guard against making it a checklist. It isn't about checking off all the knowledge side and then all of the skill side and saying, I've got them both done, so therefore I must have met this understanding. You're running them in tandem. As I'm teaching a knowledge component, I might be looking at that skill concept and how am I going to embed that in the knowledge component? That's the piece that we want to marry together. So that's really important for us to remember.
Just to help you, it's sometimes nice to organize all those concepts that are in the curriculum. In this particular case, the living things concepts. You'll find those words and you look for them. You'll see them in the curriculum guide, and it's nice to see how they're connected. I may be possible. I'm not too sure. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a grade 1 teacher. I'm more in the upper grades. But what I often would do with my students is give them a list of the concepts, and if they can show me and connect them up in a concept map and explain to me what the connection is, that generates a pretty broad understanding that they know what those concepts are, they know how they're related to them. On one level, that wouldn't be the only assessment, of course, but concepts maps are really good ways for us to view a big idea, in this case, this part of the curriculum, and it helps kids show connections as well.
Yeah, and it's so cool. You did such a great job.
I made some mistakes, but hopefully someone will point those out to me.
Oh, they're good.
And so when I talk about concepts, again, it's sometimes easy to help kids transfer that, and we'll talk about transfer in a second here. But I think it's important to look at this slide and say, if they do understand what plants are, then we can say to them, where are the plants in this picture? Or we may ask if they, to really give a test, can you see the concept of dependence in this picture? And when you ask them that question, now they're suddenly applying their understanding of those things to something they've never seen before. And that gives us an indication, do they get it? We ask the question here, is anyone meeting their needs here? How can the plants be meeting the needs of the humans here? And so when you use those kinds of questions, once again, giving kids a certain conceptual lens to look at something, it can help give us some feedback and some assessment information on where they're at. Do they really understand these concepts? An interesting thing with concepts is, they are broadly and more specifically organized as they showed up in my concept map. I think you'll find when the younger the student or the child, the more specific the concepts they are working with are for the most part. And sometimes those concepts we think are concepts at grade 1 or 2 really just become the knowledge and the facts as kids get older. So the more specific ideas are really, knowledge-based. For example, vegetables, it's a category, it is a concept, but it's pretty knowledge-based as well. And any of these concepts have a knowledge base to them, so we can't do one without the other.
And I'm pretty sure there's a few grade 1s that would not categorize vegetables as food.
Oops. we do spend a lot of time talking about the knowledge, and that's, I think, something that most of us are familiar with. When it comes to knowledge and knowing things, I know you have many strategies at your disposal that you use that. And I think as kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2 teachers, primary teachers are really good at having a whole lot of different instructional approaches to even deal with skills procedures. I think kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2 teachers, you all know that having students understand the steps and the sequence and how to do things is important, and you do that. So what I might share with you might be kind of moot. I'm not too sure, but I'm going to share with you just to make sure we cover that. So first of all, when it comes to the skills and procedures part of the curriculum, you'll see that there are verbs in them. These are all the skills and procedures for life systems. And what has to happen is we have to identify, when we identify them, we have to kind of separate what we're doing when we take a look at those. So the verb here is share, and then examples of something. So share some knowledge. Observe and describe the similarities and differences. And again, bringing in the knowledge piece. What we have to do, and I think if you go to the next slide, Chris, is we have to really be careful when we look at that to clarify what we're doing with that skill or process piece. For the most part, they show up as good assessment things. In other words, if we want to know whether kids understand how plants and animals help meet human needs, we'll state how they do that. But if we were to, so what we want to do is making sure when you're looking at that, you're not looking at that purely as I guess we want to separate out your intention. If it's to instruct or teach the skill of sharing or comparing and contrasting, we have to vet that out of that particular cusp. So if your intention, and I'm looking to point number 2, if your intention is to assess the knowledge or understanding associated with that cusp, make sure they're competent in the skill first. So if you're going to ask students to compare and contrast the needs of plants and animals, to demonstrate an understanding of needs of plants and animals, you'll want to make sure that they understand how to compare and contrast first and what those mean, so that they're not competing their skill with what they know, right? You want to make sure if you're assessing what they know, you assess what they know. Or if you want to assess what they do, you make sure that you teach to how to do it and assess that. So when you can introduce a skill, and I'm going to use the example of comparing and contrasting, you want to make sure that you teach and introduce it, not with this cusp, but introduce it with other things and other content that they're not responsible for. So when it comes to that, if you go to the next slide, Chris, I think I'll show you, for example, when we take a look at observing and describing similarities and differences between plants and animals, that's the cusp. But it's really an assessment piece, right? You're going to see whether they can see the differences between plants and animals. But we want to back up and make sure that they understand what an observation is, and that they know what similarities and they know what differences are, so that doesn't interfere with the knowledge piece, that they can identify what is plant and what is animal.
All too often, we assume that when we impart knowledge and we've done some factual things with students, that a question like similarities and differences on an exam or on an assessment is a no-brainer for them. And yet, if I've never been exposed to the notion of having to compare and draw out what I know and match those together or find the differences between, that's a big ask. And that necessarily doesn't mean I don't know. I've just never experienced that process before. So I think that's something that has to happen before we have the intent to use it as an assessment. So it's got to be taught. I've got to learn how to observe. I've got to learn when I go outside and go for a walk with you and you ask me to find living things, I need to know what that means to find, to observe. What are you asking me to describe it verbally, draw a picture? What does it mean? Like, what does observe mean? So that I can actually have some context around even similarities and differences. So that's really an important piece for sure.
And so when you go through the skills and procedures, you'll see that there are some verbs or skill verbs that maybe aren't thinking skills, but they're just restating something. For example, share examples of plants and animals native to Alberta and Canada. Sharing is a skill, and it could mean certain things, but does the customer here asking for just to state examples for the knowledge? It appears to me that that might be, given the context, the way it's used, that might be what it is. But determine or represent, those are two different things. Those are skills. What does it mean to represent? Well, you can represent it in a story. You could represent it in a poem. You could represent it in a whole lot of things. And so having kids understand that is important. And same with determine. If you're determining something, you're really always investigating it. And then there's a process with that as well.
So I might suggest that this is a page that when you go back and look at, like, you'll have access to all of this anyway. We're going to actually pull some of these out. We'll post them, but this is a page you might want to keep sort of at your table side, because as you're encountering those words and working through all of the organizing ideas, we want to put those determine, discuss in context for what it is that you're going to be doing, so that we're actually quite intentional. And certainly when a child has been exposed to it, the first organizing idea and then the second one, we can expect a little bit more as they move forward into the year, but we still have to have that learning piece that goes along with it. For those of you who've been teaching for a while, we used to have directing words at the older levels for science and math. There used to be something called directing words, so that if a student was asked to determine something, especially on a PAT or on a diploma exam, determine has some very distinct expectations attached to the word. And we're kind of missing that right now. So we've used a blend of that and the context in which it's being presented to you and to create this list for you.
Boy, this slide probably shouldn't be there.
Okay.
My mistake. I'm not going to go through that. It'll be there for those people who want to look at it as an example. And I'll show you where there'll be a link in the folder there for something like this, and I'll come up to this a little bit later. So continuing with the exploration of things, so I just wanted to bring that out to you, that we've got to keep in mind there's the knowledge, the understandings, and the skills. This is just going to be a one-time thing, and what we have for you and made reference to in the earlier, in session 1 in the recording, is something called the curriculum exploration document, only for those of you who want to go through it to see what the whole curriculum was like, to get a sense to see how the concepts fit together. And that's what this is really there. We're not going to go through this anymore, but I do want to just have Chris, if you could just open it up. There's the link there, just to get a sense of how to work through it. What you'll see, what you'll see is that's the wrong link, but that's good. That's where I wanted you to go, is to that page to open it up. Yeah.
The bottom.
Yeah. If you may or may not find this helpful, that's why we'll just go through it once. If you go to the next tab at the bottom, right. So what you can do is click off what you may want to, how good you feel about those things. So we know that the key idea for grade 1 for matter are identified there. There's 3 cusps associated, 3 understandings with that outcome. And so when you read through that objects and properties understanding, all the ideas related to that are objects, construction objects, relative properties, measurable properties, and so on. You ask yourself, is that something I've got a pretty good handle on? If you go to your level of concern, you can click that's a pretty good one for you. But if you go to the column to the left, Chris, level of concern, you can, this is again just for your own sake. You can say, hey, you know what, this one really bothers me. I give it a 4, or a level 1 is I got it. Okay. A level 4 means you're really concerned about it. You need some help. And then you could identify your area of concern. What this can also be helpful for is, if you want to go through, you can see what is coming up in the other, quickly see what's coming up in the other units and other big ideas, so that when when we're cruising sometimes and surfing or talking to people, we go, oh, okay, listen, at some point I'm going to be teaching that in this unit when I'm doing this part of the program. So that's a good thing to tuck away. So this is just a 1-pager of all the sort of big ideas that you're going to need to know. And that's all I'm going to say about that. It's not there. No one's going to, it'll be downloadable if you want it.
And it will be posted in the Moving Forward in your folder
Right.
for session 2, grade 1. That's where you'll find it. And you can just, like he said, do it on your own or not at all, whatever it works for you.
Many of you are probably familiar with this whole process of learning and understanding both knowledge, skills, and concepts. I think at one time we thought surface learning was that, you know, we'd go through as quick as we can because it's not important. It's the learning. It's just that basic knowledge, understanding, and knowledge part. But it is an important piece and a foundation to move into the deeper learning and to that ability to transfer their skills and understanding. And so do you take the time to help students understand what those particular concepts and ideas are? What is a plant? What is an animal? What is, and the word dependence kind of shows up in this one. We're talking about how plants meet needs and animals meet needs of humans, and humans help to meet the needs of plants. Make sure we take the time to provide that surface learning. And then when we get into the deep learning, that's when we start making more connections with things. What is the relationship between plants and animals and needs? We could take a look at those skill ideas and concepts. And if we take a look at similarities and differences, we might ask the question, well, you know, how are similarities and differences, how is that connected to observations, right? And then they could say, well, without making observations, it's hard to identify the similarities and differences and so on. But it's the deep part that you want to keep on promoting, giving kids as many opportunities for feedback, so they get a good sense of it. And once they're confident in that skill or the concept, then you give them new and novel and more situations that they just haven't seen before, and sometimes perhaps even a little bit more complicated. So if your first thing may be to compare two plants, maybe afterwards you may, as to transfer it, compare two things, perhaps even in another subject, right? If you're taking a look at characters in language arts, compare two characters, and now they're no longer, they're transferring it to a new situation and a new subject. So those are the processes that we're looking at when we think about how to move forward in this curriculum, because it's not enough to just stop at the surface. We need to go deep and to transfer. But when we go surface, we've got to spend time on making sure the surface is a solid foundation. So I did mention about teaching how to do something like comparing and contrasting. There is a link there, and there's an example in the folder that you'll have available to you. And if you want to open it up really quickly, I won't go through it, Chris. But if you were to compare and contrast, or if you were to do any, just go to the third slide, actually. If you were to do any kind of skills teaching, thinking, we kind of think about it like basketball or anything they might teach in phys ed. You define what it is. You did it. Here's how you do it. If there's some concepts in the steps, you stop and talk about those concepts first. For example, in comparing and contrasting, we know that kids are going to be looking for similarities and differences. So you'll want to talk about similarities and differences before you go and teach a skill. And so what this slide deck will do, we'll go through some steps, and it'll go through an example of how you may want to do that. Many of you already maybe have a lesson for this, so it would be something you just want to look at just for interest's sake. But if you're looking at it and want to see a little bit closer, feel free to open that slide deck when you have the chance. Once again, there are many ways to I guess, different ways and different strategies that you can use for each of those areas. Some of them you'll know you can use in the surface area or the deep. For example, when it comes to questioning, you can use questioning at the surface, the deep, or even the transfer level. All depends on your questioning. You can use Jigsaw, depending on your questioning, for surface. You could also use it for deep or transfer. but we put them in there just as an example of if you really want to, if you're looking for some ideas, they're really useful at those particular parts in the learning process. And if you're not familiar with those, they are Googleable. Contact Chris. I know she's got a lot of resources. Contact me. I'm familiar with many of these and can help out as well. So this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch, but it's just to know that when you're planning, you sometimes come across an activity online, saying, where does it fit in the whole learning thing? Can I use it at the surface, or do I better keep this activity a little bit later on when I'm looking at transfer? And that
a lot of these are engagement types of activities as well. I mean, that was the purpose behind some of these, is not just for the transfer of information and teaching piece, but it was also how to engage learning in different ways. Yeah. Project Zero is one of probably the number one places that you can go to that will have a lot of these on there. And they're described for you, and they give you examples, and they'll say, if you want to learn how to do 4 corners, and I've never done a 4 corners, and I think 4 corners in grade 1, you kidding? Yeah, it works really well, but they need to learn how to do it. So if you're not familiar with those, you can go to Project Zero, and they just Google that, and it'll come up, and you've got a number of different options in there that you can go to. But there are definitely some you wouldn't use a different one every day, because there is value in them learning how to use a particular engagement strategy and learning strategy over time. And then we can move on from there. And then you'll soon find too that there are some that are really comfortable with your teaching style. And there are some that you tried out and went, holy, like that was like worst nightmare of my life. I'm not going back to that. So then don't, it's just, you need to try them on too and see how they fit best for you.
And maybe just one more point before I hand it off to you, Chris, is, earlier I brought up the whole notion of the competencies and the literacy progressions and the numeracy progressions. Unless we take time to carefully choose an instructional approach, we're really not going to bring those competencies and all those things that we know really matter when we want our kids to be when they grow up. We want them to be critical, creative thinkers. We want them to be collaborative. We want them to be open-minded. We want them to be creative. And unless we choose instructional approaches that introduce students to these things and have them practice it and have them get a deep understanding of it and transfer to new situations, it's not going to happen. We're going to be doing the checklist, as Chris alluded earlier, and that's not what we want, not as educators in any curriculum, right? So that's why I think it's really important to really reflect on the instructional approaches. And like a doctor or a lawyer or a carpenter, take the tool that best fits the job. And if you don't find a tool that is working for you, seek out another one. But these are tools, I think, to help us as professionals do the job that we need to do.
Yeah. Are there any questions so far? Any comments? Anybody? Feel free to chime in or just throw it in the chat box. Okay, so we're going to move a little bit into a suggestion. This is not exclusive because there's no way in the time frame here that we can unpack an entire unit. And given that each of you teaches a little bit differently, you may be looking for different things. But one way to look at this living system, and I purposely done this by the numbering system that we used in living systems of 1.1 to 1.3. Would I necessarily teach it that way? No. But we also are aware that some people would like to go that route. And so we're going to provide things that could fit in to each of those cusp areas for the numbered outcome. But that does not preclude. In fact, if I was doing this, I would be doing a lot of 1.1 and 1.2 together as the students are learning the different vocabulary and going through different activities. So just sort of in a general overview, just doing a quick review of, do they even know what's living and non-living? Do we have a good sense of what that is? And just having a bit of a review and an activity that goes with this. Again, it's not necessarily a stand up and deliver. We talk about primary is the kids there really need lots of foundational knowledge, and absolutely they do. You can't transfer if you don't have foundational knowledge. But that doesn't mean I have to stand up and deliver all the foundational knowledge and tell you what everything means first. It means that I can also tease out of you what you already know and use that and leverage that to my advantage as well. So I kind of take that approach more than I do the stand up and deliver approach. The second one, looking sort of through that lens of observation, again, just trying to have a look, what is a plant and what is an animal? And again, I could even go outside. Once I've got those defined with them inside, I could go outside and can you find me what are your observations, right? If I've talked about observations, they might not in grade 1 be able to write a sentence yet. I'm pretty sure they won't, but we can draw a picture and I can talk to you about what's in my picture. That's my observation. And maybe I can write some words down and I'm very good at that. So what observation skills do they have that we can leverage right now while the weather's still nice and take them outside and look at some of those pieces? And how do they see differences and similarities? Like how do they see that they're the same and how do they see that they're different? And just again, to tease out of them what they already know. And then the third kind of aspect of it is the function that plants and animals serve both directions. Like in that, really that cusp is asking us to tease out of students and to talk about plants and animals serve a purpose for us as humans, but we also have a purpose for the plants and animals. Like what's our role in looking after plants and animals? So it's a two-way street is kind of what we're looking at. Okay, so you will have full access to this slide deck. So don't feel like you have to take screenshots because you're going to get the whole thing anyway. It'll be all up to you to use whatever you want or none of it. It's up to you. So in doing this, I've also created some tools that you might want to use along the way, again, depending on what you have. So looking at sort of that review of living and non-living, I would just start with a card sort. And that's actually what I provided you with. I've made a card sort where we just would say to them, let's get on the floor. And can you tell me what you think is living and non-living? And I would use those words. And if they're still not with me on that, I would say, what's alive and what's not alive? Without asking them to define it, without defining it for them, without giving them a whole bunch of examples. I might just want to see, this is my sort of formative assessment to find out where is my group at? Do they have a good understanding of those skills? Because they should have that from kindergarten. Okay, the second piece would be to leverage those cards again. And we're talking in 1.1 about plants and animals, but also the indigenous plants and animals to Alberta. Like what are the common plants and animals in Alberta? So in my card sort, I will tell you right now off the top of your head, I put numbers on each one of them. And I just numbered them and named them. There's a list. There's your cheat sheet behind the scenes. So if you're not sure about all the plants and animals that you kind of commonly find in Alberta, especially if you're new to Alberta, then I gave you the list of them so that you can name them for the kids as well. So again, we're going to use these card sorts more than once. So it's the familiarity of a card sort going through the process. Then what are the needs of plants and animals? What are they things? And we give them cards, and it might say food, it might say air, it might say who needs it, and how are they going to sort that out in their own mind? Again, without just standing up and telling them. We might watch a video, which I have suggestions for you, and it might talk about here's some plants and animals, but we haven't prefaced it. We just let them watch the video and say, now what did we learn in that? How could we decide what plants and animals need to survive? And just see how they come about with this and then have that powerful conversation that comes after it. And then there is a transfer activity at the end. So kind of how do I pull this all together and see how they would sort of show me that they really have understood the big concepts and the ground pieces that we have in here. So living and non-living, I'm giving you some suggested resources. Again, remember I said at the beginning, I'd like to build a resource kit for you in each of your folders. So if you have books that work well with living and non-living, feel free to share those with me and I will put them into that list as well. But this is one, we had ordered this with the other curriculum pilot when we were working on it then, and we had created units. It's a great one. It's a nice story. And I would just start with the story. I would just read the story. I know it's living. And I wouldn't even say, we're going to talk about living and non-living. I would just read the story. And then I would give them their card sort and say, can you find what you think is living and non-living? And so these cards have been created for you already. You don't have to make your own. You may already have some of your own. You don't have to worry about it. But I purposefully only put two things that are really not alive, and they should be sort of really obvious to them. So if we are seeing those on the living side, we know that we have some work to do there. But in this pile of the living, because I want to use these again to resort them for a number of different concepts, I have flowers and I have animals and I have trees and I have whatever. So this is a big pile that later they're going to keep seeing it over and over, but always looking through a different lens. So in this case, we were talking about living and non-living. And we could have the conversation about why did you put things in this pile? Not tell them that living because it is what, let's just ask them, why are they all in this pile? How did you guys decide that? Talk to your shoulder partner. Have your partner decide who's going to talk, right? So just having that conversation with them. And then when we move to, let's now take what we said was not living, let's take those two cards away. And let's see which ones are the plants and which ones are the animals. And again, we're going to have a conversation about how did you decide what to put there? How did you know that this is going on the plant side? How did you know it goes on the animal side? I did do this a couple of years ago with a little guy in kindergarten, and he looked at me and he said, really? You don't know why a plant is over here? And I said, no, actually I don't. But clearly he thought I was losing it. So we need them to articulate that. And remember what Ted said is, if we're asking them to discuss, we have to give them some frameworks on how do you discuss? What do you bring out in a discussion? What are the key points? We don't just say because it is. Let's start grounding that with some facts. Let's get some things that you noticed about plants, and what are the things that you know that put it over there? And what are the things that you know about animals that put it over there, and so on. So this would be one activity that we could definitely use more than once. When we talk about basic needs, again, there's a number of different stories. They're read alouds. If you don't have the book, I selected the ones that we've used in the past as well. Again, you probably have lots in your classroom, but if you don't, or you do, and just send them to me. But these are both stories. You could read both or read just one of them, and just have them have a discussion afterwards. So what did we just learn? What did we learn about those living? We had all of our animals over here and plants over here, but now what have we learned about both of them? Is there anything that was in common? So we're getting into that similarities, the similarities and differences. And that's where we want to go. We want to have an oral conversation with them. And then we're going to give them some cards that have words on them. And maybe we have to go through the words with them so they read them. But we don't want to tell them which ones are going to go where. That's still the piece that we want them to do some work. Having a set of hula hoops in your classroom is a valuable tool, or a couple of them for sure, because a Venn diagram is one of the highest diagrams that we can ask students to work with in their deep thinking. They have to know a few things. They can't just randomly put stuff down in a Venn diagram. They really do need to know what are plant needs. So now we've had a little discussion about how we knew they were plants. What are the animal needs? And then they might get these words in between, like food and air and water, and say, well, I think they both need them. I have a card here that says both. I actually never use it. I just put the animal needs and plant needs down, and I leave the center open because I want them to struggle a little bit to say, well, I think that this is supposed to go in this circle, but it's supposed to go in that circle. And so then I ask them, is there a place that is in both circles? Is there a place you could find to put them? So that they start to tease that out on their own, rather than us saying to them, this is what we call a Venn diagram. And over here, we have a circle in here. And then in the middle is what this, like, let's do the activity first. We can unpack the Venn diagram definitely for them. But at some point, we want them to have a little bit of a productive struggle. And you'll find some words in here. I know that there's a number of people that registered for grade 1 that are teaching grade 1-2 splits. And so you will actually find in the card sort some of the words that actually go into grade 2. And quite frankly, I don't know why we couldn't do them both together at the same time anyway. So things like movement, it does come up in 1.3 as well, but it also comes up in grade 2 when we look at some of the things there. So movement and no movement. I need an environment. A plant needs an environment to grow in. They can freeze. We can put clothes on, but they can't, right? So having that conversation again about why did they put the cards where they did? And then maybe doing a gallery walk. Does everybody see the same things in the Venn diagrams that are on the floor? If we don't, do you have any questions of a group that looks different than yours, right? It's having that dialogue again. How do we ask questions of our friends in class? Like, how does that work? So again, we're working on that similarities and differences, but we're doing it also in an up and about engaging way, right? We want to get them out of their chairs. We want them to move around. We want them to see, do the gallery walk, see what they're finding, all of those different pieces. And then what are basic needs of all living things, right? We could ask that question. Does everyone feel comfortable that they have found the pieces that work for all living things? So these are under header cards, and they're in your list of materials that we've got for you. So again, when I just look at the plant side, I would see these pieces over here, but then I want to highlight the fact that I'm also seeing the same thing over on the animal side. Grade 2 gets into reproduction, so I left that out, but there's a card there that says reproduction on it because you could use the same card sort in grade 2 if you wanted to just extend it. So here's what it kind of looks like just on a Venn diagram, just typed in, so we could go back and talk about this if we want to reiterate. And then we might want to say, could you find a plant or an animal that wasn't in the picture? Can you think of a plant or animal that also has these needs? And can you tell me where that animal lives? And can you tell me what kind of plant that is that you were talking about? And some of them might say Christmas tree, right? So they don't know the name, it's a spruce tree, but they call it a Christmas tree. Okay, so what about a Christmas tree? Where did it come from? And what does it need? And those types of things. So we can have them do a little bit deeper dig, and they could do it with a partner. They have to come up with a plant or an animal on their own that wasn't in their pictures. And they can always look at their pictures and see what wasn't there, right? And if they're farm children, they may have different animals that are going to come to mind right away. If they're city and they have pets at home that weren't pictured in there, that's an easy one for them too. And then we can talk about that pet again, because that pet, we can talk about how do we care for animals, right? That's coming up as well. I have an additional slide set in here. I'll just click it on, but I won't go through it. So if you were looking for just some basic needs of plants, here's another slide deck if you just need another one, or you want to come back the next day and say, let's review again what we learned yesterday. Let's just look at plants. And then we could ask a question at the end. So what of these things that we just talked about work for animals too? Because the plants are the soil, the animals are not, right? So then we can go back. That gives us a chance to review those concepts and see, oh yeah, they got it. They understood what they're supposed to be doing here. So do all animals move the same way? And this is one activity that we did do with grade 1s. We had a similar card sort. It was a different set of pictures, but we just said, do all animals move the same way? So they had similar pictures. They didn't even catch on to this, but here's some puppy dogs, here's some birds, and here's some no feet. So now we ask them with that same card sort, can you go back and can you sort them on how they might move? And they're going to say, should I put the plants in there? Yeah, absolutely. Where are you going to put the plants? Let them muck through that. And they have this conversation about, oh, this one has 4 feet. Oh, these guys have 2 feet. Oh, these guys have wings, right? So now we get them to start talking about how they want to group them together. There's some fish in there. There's some snakes in there, right? So they don't see the feet. So we can have that conversation. So again, they come up with their picture sort and they put all their plants together. All their 4-legged animals go together. And there's even a debate. We had a debate with one group of grade 1s where they said, you know, rabbits really only walk on 2 feet. We said, really? Do they? So we had to go and get film clips of rabbits so that they could see how a rabbit moves. And then the same argument with a frog. A frog only hops. They really only use 2 feet. So we said again, so sometimes you have to clarify for them that what they're thinking is very limited and that we have to show them that. So then we had that conversation. How did you know to put these in these groups like this? Again, a gallery walk even. Everybody got the same things in groups? If not, what are you thinking, right? So we've got birds. Birds have 2 feet. Well, they also have wings. Then there's the argument, well, chickens can't fly. Well, they can a little bit, but no, they don't just take off like a goose does, for sure. So then that's a good conversation to have. Some birds have wings, but they don't fly very well, right? So then do we want to put them in their own group? Do we just want to say they run around more than anything? We have no feet. How do they get around? Or we have no feet, no movement, right? That's our plants. So there's lots of possibilities there where we can label them and start talking about how we made those decisions. And why is it important for me to have legs? Because if I'm not a plant, which is determined by the environment I'm living in and growing in and the soil I'm in, I have to go get my food. I don't get it brought to me by the sun. I have to go get it. And so that means I need a way to get there. What do we have for humans? We have 2 feet. We move on our 2 feet. So again, just a quick summary of, what do we have there? And then with their partners, what are some examples that's not in there? Give me another example of 2 feet. Give me another example of 4 feet. Do you know anything else that can move but doesn't have any feet, right? Then you kind of find out what they're got at home for pets and what they don't have. So with your shoulder partner, find another animal that belongs in each group. So that's kind of what we're just looking at here. And then just let them share it out. Make a list on the board. One of the books that we found very helpful was Living and Non-Living Things. It's a compare and contrast book. It's a great little resource. It comes with a teacher resource of about 26 pages. It covers most of grade 1 concepts actually for our new curriculum and part of grade 2 because it goes into reproduction as well. So if you're looking for a resource, this is one that you can have. And I do have these at the end by the author and whatever. And then the third part that we're focused on is that concept of needs. Animals have needs, plants have needs, but needs have to be met and needs can also be shared, right? I have a need of a human being, maybe because I have a dog that comforts me. So going to the cell, it gives me that social emotional comfort. But I have a responsibility to meet the needs of my dog by feeding him and walking him and giving him exercise. So it's a reciprocal way that we need to go. Plants by far are more important than animals. We cannot live as humans without plants. We can live without animals. So that's a conversation to have with students. And I've got a number of different videos that are in here, and I won't go through all of these, but you'll see that there are links, and each one of those links are also in a list at the end. So you'll have everything. So you have a link in here where we talk about caring for an animal. And in this one, there's a lesson plan. It's an actual full lesson plan. It covers way more than we need to, but it actually gives you another card sort, and it says walk around and put them in groups of 2. And these are just pets. These are common pictures of pets. And you're just going to put one pet between whoever you match together in a group. And you're going to ask them, how are you going to care for that animal? So you might have given a group of kids a budgie and they've never had a bird in their life. So now it's a good learning opportunity for them to start transferring some of their learning. What does a bird need to eat? And then again, what are you going to get from the bird? What is that bird going to give you as comfort, or is there a purpose to having that bird? You got to get a little bit careful with the chicken part, right? Because some kids get a little emotional about the kids killing of chickens and cows and whatever you eat them, like they get really attached to them. So have to have that conversation, but just know that some of your kids may be a little sensitive. Plants, what do they do for humans? And in here, I've also built a large component for you is, what about the medicinal plants that are used by Indigenous cultures, right? There are 4 sacred plants in particular. So if you're not familiar with the 4 sacred plants, I've included that in the link and in the handout, and a book that you might want to look at. So I've tried to kind of cover all of those pieces for you. And then this one here, remember I just said we can't live without plants. This might be more for you. It's just as if you're trying to have a conversation, you don't have a lot in your toolbox when it comes to the plant piece, just about what the research is saying, you might want to use this. It would be appropriate to watch snippets of it with the kids. I don't know if I'd watch the whole thing. So this is all within the resources that we're going to share with you and that are available to you. So here's a picture of, let's say, common everyday pets they might have. This just prompts their thinking about what's our responsibility? Well, I have to make sure that my puppies have a place to live. I have to make sure that my cat has some water to drink, right? So again, it's what's the responsibility for care of an animal? How do these animals help us? It's not just caring, but sometimes the reciprocation of helping us. So the security at an airport where they sniff through luggage, opening the door where they pull on the string to let a person who's in a wheelchair through. So again, having that conversation about the reciprocation of plants and animals, what do they do for us, not just how do we look after them? And here is one of the books. It comes from Native Reflections. You may already have it. It's a series. It comes from the Grandmother, Grandfather series, which talks about a whole bunch of different topics, but one of them is the 4 sacred medicines. And so a nice story for them to see, and a great learning opportunity. If any of you had the kits, I know there are some of you in here right now that had built the First Nations kits with us. You come from school boards that have them. There were kits built for kindergarten to grade 12 in math, science, and social studies. So if you do have the kits in your jurisdiction, grade 3 has the rock in science. So it talks about the indigenous culture of rocks and the beliefs around rocks. And if you go to grade 6, you have samples of the sage, the sweetgrass, the cedar, all of those are in your grade 6 kit. So you can just pull those out and actually use them as demos for the students to see. So a possible transfer activity, how do I tie all this together? And keeping in mind that if you're going to do this at the beginning of the year, might not have my skills yet in writing great sentences and doing those yet. So let's have them design their own animal or plant. It doesn't have to be one or the other. They can choose. And what's it going to be called? But it has to be unique. It's not one of the plants they've already seen. It has to be their own. Make it up. Like, what's your unique animal going to be? Like, some kids had horse heads with, pig behinds on them or whatever, and called them whatever. So just make a unique animal. And then what are the characteristics of your animal? Tell us about your animal. What does it need to live? What kind of food does it like to eat? What will it need to survive? How will you have to look after it? And what will your animal do to help us? So then a word that might come up is unique. You want to create a unique plant or animal, and you want to describe its basic needs to us. And how does it help, or how do we have to help it in order to survive? So just tying those pieces together, and the fact that they can't use an existing animal, they have to think it through, means they can have a little bit of fun with it and be creative, but they also have to understand those components and concepts that we were looking for. Again, going back to what we talked about in the skill sets, how are they sharing that? How do you want them to produce that result? What is it going to look like? What skill set are you asking me? Are you asking me to do critical thinking and communication? And if so, how do you want me to do that, right? Can I use plasticine and just do an oral presentation? What is it that you're asking for me to identify for you? In addition, in your resources, I'm just providing this. This is just a sample first page. BC rolled out, we were supposed to roll out with them and we didn't, but they had rolled out, and I had worked with them on their science and math, so I was aware of this. They have a really nice rubric for science and technology tied together. So if you don't have a quick assessment rubric that you can use, there's a couple of pages to this. I just put it there. If you want to use it, great. If you have one that works for you, just ignore it. A lot of this is just, if you don't have it, it's there. Okay, so that's sort of a starting point, hopefully, to get you going. It gives you at least a few things, slide decks that you'd be able to use and have from there. Ted, anything you want to add on at the end here? I'm going to still address a few things. Oops, we lost one of our slides here. Okay, no, sorry, wrong one. I still have a slide deck.
No, I don't.
Sorry, I'm on the wrong slide deck, that's why.
That's all right.
Okay, so first of all, a little feedback for us. Does that kind of material help you? Is it what you're hoping to get when you come away? I mean, we can't plan the whole unit because everybody does it a little differently, but if we can give you an overview like that, if that's helpful, great. If it isn't, you're not going to hurt our feelings by saying, no, I was really hoping for something like this. That would be great. I have some assessments built in there as well, and they're in the folder. And so you'll have access to those. So what happens now? All of this recording, all of these resources and links, and all of these extra slide decks and whatever are put into the Moving Forward website. If you go to your science cohort, just log in like you got your login before, go to the science cohort, grade 1. And if you go to session 2, that's where it will all be. And it will be there forever. You don't have to race in there and download everything. It's not timed. It will just stay there. Like, we've loaded them in such a way that they're there in perpetuity, and you can go in and out whenever you want. So if you're not teaching this right now, there is no rush to run in there and get it. That'll be great. Our next session is on November 2nd. And the downloading of that planning template that's in there that Ted had referred to, and the sort of that overview, remember those are for yourself. But we just want to make sure that you've got some tools to get started and that you're comfortable with them. Let's see what else here. So if you have anything you want to share, I'll start a sharing folder and it will be ready to go, and we'll put it in there. coming soon, and we're supposed to happen this morning, but it didn't. I am meeting with the ExploreNet company. We met with them last week. Ted and I were at meetings on Wednesday and Thursday, and they were with us. Gizmos, if you have not been to the New Learn Alberta site, then you may not know that Gizmos is back and that the government has paid for the licensing for them. So they are only paying for the license for K-3, and Gizmos, out of their good heart, are posting for grades 4 to 6. So they're posting the full gamut for us to use. And so I approached them and asked whether or not they would consider leveraging all of their knowledge of what they have, let's say, that links into Living Systems, and then we would connect the links to the Living Systems gizmos that work for your grade in grade 1 to whatever we had to cover in your folder. So you will have a site in there called Gizmos. It'll have a list of it, and then you would be able to go in. And so for those of you who don't know what the gizmos are, they're just interactive lesson plans that are already created for you. They're beautiful. And it just gives you another way that you can engage students. You know, not a worksheet. Maybe this is a nice way we can put them on a smartboard, or you can do it on their iPads or whatever, like however you want to do it with them. So it just gives you another tool. So we're going to put that into your folder as soon as I meet with them, and that's not going to be till Wednesday. So don't look for it overnight. It probably won't be there. The posting of all of your work will happen shortly after this session. So I'll be sending everything we have to our webmaster. He's just driving from BC to Alberta. I think he should be here probably around 6:30. So give him a little bit of time to get himself set in his hotel room, and then he'll start posting this to your site. So at the very least tomorrow morning, everything will be there for you to grab whenever you need it. Okay. Now, let me see if I got some questions here. All right, is there anything that anybody wants to ask or not sure of what we have? I'm going to put a link into the chat box for you. This link I came across not too long ago. Oops, I got to get out of this thing first. This is for, and I'm not suggesting you have to do this, but some of you have also emailed me and said, are we going to do any coding? And the answer is, we're going to try and embed the science technology and the science processes into the work that we do. But in the hour that we have, it's not a lot of time. And I came across this. This is put in for Alberta, and it is an opportunity for teachers from grades 1 to 9, I believe it is. If you don't know how to code, you can, when you click this on, there's a description, but you can go in, register your class, and they kind of lead you through the whole idea of what coding is. Now, coding isn't so big in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2. Coding is really just a form of instruction. So if I'm outside with the students, you might want to say, where did you find that log? Could you write the instructions down on how to get from this location to that location? That's a form of coding, where they're actually having to develop the process. And you'll see that in the science and technology. But if it's something that interests you, there are grade 1 teachers, lots of them, that are doing coding with the kids. So I just threw it out there. I don't know a ton about it. I did not get a hold of them. So if somebody does go and do it, let us know, maybe the next meeting, or just let me know by email that if it works or it's not good or whatever, and then I can just send it out to the group and let everybody know. Okay. I think we have reached the end.
Chris, could I just mention one thing?
Yes.
You mentioned the planning document. I just wanted maybe to point it out. There are 2 documents there. One was the exploration document, and the other one was the planning template. Is there the link there for that?
Did you build one in here?
I thought I had, but maybe not. That's why. Okay.
At the bottom. No, that's good.
Okay. I'm not too sure. Hope that's the right one. Now, everybody has their own way of planning for sure. And some people prefer to take the outcomes and cut them up and have little paper things as they're planning and so on. But this one's available for those of you who prefer something more digital or want things in one place. Or just a reminder of maybe some things to keep in mind while you're planning.
I'm going to put it in the chat box. Can I put it in the chat box? Is that okay?
Yeah,
Then
it'll
they-
be one of the resources that's in your list of in the folder that you'll have access to. But yeah, you can put it in the chat box.
I'm just thinking, because then you can bring it up. I'll bring it up on our screen as well,
Yeah,
but
you
I just want you
open
to
it.
bring it up. It's not opening for whatever reason, so I'm just going to throw it up here. There we go.
Okay, it's meant to have a place to organize all the cusps and everything, because sometimes when you have to cut and paste and everything, it's a little bit trickier to manage. So if you're planning a unit or some lessons, you can use this. The front page here, you could just choose your organizing idea that you're working on. Are they there on the down list, Chris?
They're not in here, but I can go over here.
Okay. Maybe we've got the wrong one. Well, anyway, we'll be fine.
Here it is, right here. Here's the organizing ideas, and when I click it on, I get all of the organizing ideas for
Right.
each of your pieces in your curriculum.
Exactly. I see you're at the bottom tab. So that first tab at the bottom, where it says grade 1 outcomes and cusps, that's where you can kind of choose what you want. They're all listed on those menus. So if you just choose one, I guess, Chris, just for an example's sake.
Okay, there's our living
And
systems.
then you go down to the next tab at the bottom, the actual planner itself.
Okay.
All right, that's where you take a look and you can start gathering and organizing your thoughts. So the only thing that's going to show up in this place is what you selected on the first page. So if you go to the tab at the very top there under organizing idea, you'll see that the one you chose is there, but the others won't be there because you maybe haven't selected them yet. So if you go under knowledge, under the drop-down menu, Chris, under the knowledge row, there's nothing there because in that first tab you didn't select it in. This is just here just to start organizing things for you. Once you have those picked out that you want to work on, if you just you can decide what competency might be something you want to focus on. Because once again, the competencies we don't report on, but to help us to get kids and to become those critical thinkers and those collaborators and innovators, we want to make sure that our lessons, not all of them, we want to make sure, because it's just impossible to them all at one time, but which one or two is going to be the focus of the particular activity that you're working on. So you want to choose some. As you're going through this, you may say, okay, well, here's the planning thing, here's the outcome, but here's the concepts I want to work on. And there's a drop-down menu with some of the key concepts organized by the big idea. So you'll see living system, needs, maybe that's the one you're going to work on. You want to make sure your definition of the concepts are very straightforward so that you have them, that students through the grade, and then when they go to the next grade, have the same definition that they're working with. Once you identify those, you have to scroll down, you say, well, I also want to work on this key skill here. And there's a drop-down menu saying, for this particular one, describe or compare and contrast or asking questions is one of the skills in the learning outcome. So what is it to ask a question? What do kids need to do to ask a question? What does it mean? What's a good question? And so you go through the whole thing of how to ask questions, or what does it mean to follow instructions? And those are skills that are identified in the skills portion of the curriculum. So once you have that in the definition, then you go ahead and plan your activity details. And these are organized in surface, deep, and transfer. You'll see as you go along here, you can choose an instructional approach, and the things that Chris went through are excellent. They can be plugged in here. So Chris also, when she went through yours, had them identified as a surface learning activity or a deep learning activity. So as you're going along, you want to make sure that you say, okay, how am I going to unravel these ideas and these lessons in a way that I'm making sure that I've got some good solid surface happening here. I've assessed it. They're ready to move on to more deeper and then more transfer learning activities as you scroll down the way there. Again, this is not our way to necessarily saying you need to do it this way. Sometimes it's nice to have all the outcomes and everything on one spot, and you can plan your activities and your lessons or your units all on one sheet that way. And that's what I wanted to mention to you, is that that's there and available to you as well when you go to that resource folder that'll be posted on the website pretty soon.
And if you're doing it kind of by sections, 1.1, 1.2, like, or you're blending them together, I actually initially, when Ted and I were playing with this, I actually had a section down here called resources, and I was just putting whatever one I was going to do for this lesson unit that I was creating. I just put it at the bottom, but I mean, we took that off because you're not necessarily going to do it in the order of 1.1, 1.2, whatever. So, but that's just another way of doing it. You can just throw the examples or the links or anything that you get from the website that we shared with you. If you want them, just embed them at the bottom. There's your quick links to get in there. All your PowerPoints or anything like that you're going to use. Okay. We are 1 minute over, you guys. I am so sorry. Like we will endeavor to be right at 5 o'clock in the future. So thank you very much, everyone. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions, if you have things to share. Again, I'm just going to keep harping on that. Feel free to send them to me, especially book links. And I did meet with Edmonton Catholic this morning, and they're going to graciously share when they're done their list of resources. They're going to share them with us as well. So we will try and get those up to you as well. So we're hoping that people around the province will just sort of get on board, and the more we can do together, the less work it is for everybody else to do. So that's great. So thank you very much. Have a great night, and get on your way out of your classrooms for those of you who are still sitting in your classroom. Thanks very much, everyone. Good night.